Are you trying to run me over, Sir Philip?
No, go away.
Look like it, sir. Will you respond to those who've made accusations, Sir Philip?
Can you go away?
Sky News, the full story first.
It's 10 o'clock. This is Sky News at 10. I'm Anna Botting, live from Auschwitz, where today survivors and world leaders gathered to mark 80 years since the camp's liberation. Only 7,000 out of more than 1 million survived death here at the hands of the Nazis. Just 56 were present today to bear witness to the horror.
All my little friends were rounded up and driven to their deaths, while the heartbreaking cries of their parents fell on deaf ears.
In the first visit of a British monarch to Auschwitz, King Charles warned of the dire risks when evil is allowed to flourish. And in the UK, major public buildings were tonight lit up in purple in tribute to the millions who lost their lives.
Also tonight on News at 10, a mass of humanity on an odyssey home. Around 200,000 Palestinians move north in Gaza as the Strip is reunified following the ceasefire agreement. We report from the Democratic Republic of the Congo as the UN warns about escalating violence after Rwandan-backed rebels seize control of a key city.
We're trying to see as much as we can while seeking shelter. There's ongoing fighting in the streets as M23 cleans it block by block.
Plus, we'll look at the Chinese AI startup that caused a nightmare on Wall Street today. And we'll take a first look at tomorrow's front pages in our press preview from 10:30 right through to midnight.
Hello, good evening. 80 years ago, on this day, the Soviet Red Army arrived at the sprawling series of camps which makes up Auschwitz-Birkenau. Here they found survivors, just 7,000, emaciated and starving. 10 days earlier, another 60,000 had been forced to walk 60 kilometres, a death march which killed up to 15,000 of them. These were the final days of Auschwitz, the notorious killing camp, where 1.1 million people lost their lives, 1 million of them Jewish. Today, world leaders, royalty, including the King, with the first visit to Auschwitz of a British monarch, gathered here to honour those who survived and remember those who did not. They were joined by some 50 survivors who today told of their harrowing escape from the horrors of this place. Our Europe correspondent, Siobhan Robbins, is here at Auschwitz and has our first report tonight.
Returning to hell, some of Auschwitz's last survivors. Those who lived to see freedom, remembering those who did not. Some wore the stripes of the camp's uniform, no longer a symbol of detention, but defiance, survival. Then at the death wall, a place where so much innocent blood was spilt, they reached out to the lost loved ones. While those who could still travel returned, survivors like Albrecht, whose parents were murdered at Auschwitz, sat with his memories at home.
How can I forget when I think about my family, my mother, my father, my uncles or my grandma? Every day when I wash myself, I see my number. How can I forget?
This is what Soviet soldiers found when they finally liberated Auschwitz 80 years ago. 7,000 of the weakest and sickest, discarded in this city of death where more than 1 million had been murdered.
It's impossible to fully comprehend the horrors that the people who were held here went through. And survivors are worried that when they're no longer around to be able to tell their story, that the world's memory of that trauma, that genocide, will fade.
The responsibility of remembrance, a message carried by King Charles as he met those who'd escaped the genocide.
As the number of Holocaust survivors regrettably diminishes with the passage of time, the responsibility of remembrance rests far heavier on our shoulders and on those of generations yet unborn.
And where better to remind people of unthinkable acts than at the death camp's great gates. Here survivors gathered, some with family, others carrying ghosts of the past, to bear witness to one of the greatest crimes in history.
In autumn, they started the construction of the gas chambers and the crematorium. It was no longer a POW camp. This is when the killing machine started its operation. It's difficult to calculate all the people killed here.
Alongside survivors, heads of state, here German leaders paying their respects amid memories of their painful past. A past, we're warned, must not be replayed in the present as anti-Semitism rises again.
We are also here to proclaim and to pledge that we will never, never, ever allow history to repeat itself. I remember as a 5.5-year-old child watching from my hiding place in Starchowitz labor camp as all my little friends were rounded up and driven to their deaths, while the heartbreaking cries of their parents fell on deaf ears.
Watching outside, members of the public, some weighed down by the history of this wretched place. Others like Shimon and his son Stash, honouring a grandfather enslaved here.
We want to remember the past so that we know what the future holds, that things like this will never happen again.
Do you think it's important for children your age to see this, to remember?
Yeah, I think it's very important so they could see how hard it was for people to live this long here, to survive.
And to end this moving memorial, a final act of respect for the dead, candles carried by the living. But for some, the emotion got too much. What was done here cannot be healed, and many know they will never make this journey again.
Well, let's speak to Siobhan now in a different part of this vast complex. And it certainly was a day of harrowing testimony, of raw emotion and lessons to be learned.
Yes, and I think just listening to those horrendous stories that every one of those survivors carried with them as they returned here reminds you of the strength of the people who are continuing to tell us that this is an act that cannot be forgotten. And if you haven't been to Auschwitz, it is sprawling. It is a city of death designed to be absolutely perfected in the amount of people that it could kill. And every single stone here is soaked with the blood of victims. So when you watch those survivors touching that death wall, you have to remember that they are thinking of the majority who came here who didn't survive. And I think the question really is, when those people are gone, the people who saw the horrors, which we really cannot understand, when they've gone, how do we remember? And I think that's what they're so keen to underline. And of course we have Auschwitz itself as a living memorial to the worst acts of humanity. But we also have a responsibility ourselves, and that responsibility we now carry on our shoulders to hand over the memory to the next generation and the next generation, so that the acts, the crimes committed here are never forgotten.
Siobhan, thank you. Well, the commemoration here was just the epicentre of a global display of respect for the millions who lost their lives, not just in the Holocaust, but also in other crimes against humanity. In the UK, major landmarks were tonight lit up in purple to mark Holocaust Memorial Day. And a service was held attended by survivors, as well as the Prince and Princess of Wales and leading political figures. Here's Sky's Lisa Holland.
At a time of continuing conflict in the world, heightened security at London's Guildhall, current events inescapable at the UK's commemorations. A service not only to mark the 80th liberation of Auschwitz, but on this day, every year, the Holocaust and subsequent genocides are remembered. Now in their 80s and 90s, up to 70 Holocaust survivors were able to attend the ceremony. Many more, perhaps too frail, unable to come. In the minds of a few and the imagination of most, they remembered the lives lost. The Prince of Wales also spoke of his great-grandmother Alice, who risked her life offering refuge to Jewish families in Greece.
She was sometimes interviewed by the Gestapo and used her deafness to an advantage, pretending not to understand their questions or what they were talking about. It worked, and they soon gave up. Thanks to her, the entire Cohen family survived the war.
The Prime Minister revealed his ambition for greater understanding of the Holocaust to be taught in schools.
And where is never again, as anti-Semitism still kills Jewish people? Today, we have to make those words mean more. So we will make Holocaust education a truly national endeavour.
Before the service, it was a chance to reunite with survivors the Princess of Wales had photographed 5 years ago.
She's warm-hearted, kind, like a friend.
What did the Princess of Wales say to you?
How nice to see you, Stephen. I asked her how she was, and she said, yeah, she was fine. I think when you've got people like that showing an interest in what we're trying to do, that trickles down to all sorts of other people. You know, if they're interested, well, it must be interesting, sort of thing.
Also at the service was Alfred Garwood. He was taken to Bergen-Belsen concentration camp with his family as an 8-month-old baby. After the war, they tried to rebuild their life in London.
The recognition of the terrible nature of what the Holocaust did to those of us that survived, as well as to those that died, means that it has some meaning, has some importance.
The message of this service at a time of rising anti-Jewish and anti-Muslim sentiment to learn from the past in the hope of a better future. Lisa Holland, Sky News at London's Guildhall.
Well, that is all from here, from Auschwitz. It's certainly been a day of sombre remembrance and commemoration, including by the dwindling number of people who were here 80 years ago when this camp was liberated. We and they may never see a day quite like this again. From here at Auschwitz-Birkenau, let's head to Gillian for more of the day's news.
Anna, thank you. Hundreds of thousands of people have been returning to northern Gaza today as part of the fragile ceasefire between Israel and Hamas. But after 15 months of war, many Palestinians are returning to homes in ruins and infrastructure completely destroyed. For months, the Gaza Strip has been cut in half by the Netzarim corridor. Manned by IDF troops, civilians have been unable to cross into the north. But for the first time in the war, today people were able to return north to what's left of their homes. 200,000 people moved north this morning alone, after the Israeli army withdrew as part of the ceasefire agreement. The displaced are returning to rubble. Almost 3/4 of the north has been damaged or destroyed, shown here in red. The IDF retain a buffer zone along the border, extending halfway into the Strip in places. From Jerusalem, our Middle East correspondent, Alistair Bunkle, reports.
With fires burning for warmth, Gazans waited through the night as mediators worked to resolve an issue that had threatened the ceasefire over the weekend. Nearby and in the darkness, Israeli forces started withdrawing from the Netzarim corridor, a passage that has split Gaza in two and that was so strategically important for the IDF campaign in Gaza. As the sun rose, and with Israeli soldiers gone, hundreds of thousands on foot and carrying what they can were finally able to move freely north for the first time in almost a year. They looked exhausted, but hopeful.
I stayed at the checkpoint for more than 6 days in this cold weather, without a blanket or a mattress. I waited for this moment to see my family in North Gaza.
For hours, families walked, with the coast on one side and past houses, many totally destroyed, on the other. It was a tide of humanity, returning home. Many thought that this day would never happen. Palestinian families, for months separated by only a few kilometers but divided by the fighting, were at last reunited. Long queues of cars waited to be checked, piled high with mattresses, rugs, tents, you name it. All the possessions they have left, everything they will need to survive, with so many homes left uninhabitable. I want my grandmother, this girl cries. They don't have any food or drink, so I brought her some things, she says. A US private company, using Egyptian personnel, is X-raying and inspecting vehicles as they travel north, making sure no weapons are being smuggled. As part of a new agreement, Hamas has said it will now release 3 Israeli hostages this Thursday, including Arbel Yehud and Agam Berger. and 3 more will be released at the weekend. But as those already home celebrate with their families, Hamas has now confirmed that 8 of the hostages due to be released in the first phase are dead. Israeli forces remain in Gaza. Tanks can be seen in the distance. But this is an extraordinary moment in the war and a significant moment for the ceasefire. Some of the Israeli far right have criticised these scenes as total surrender to Hamas, and the images are being celebrated by Palestinians as a victory of survival and a message to President Trump that they won't leave Gaza after he suggested that they should go to Jordan and Egypt. The truce is little more than a week old, and it remains extremely fragile. But now that they have partially pulled back and Gazans are returning home, it'll be much harder for Israel to return to fighting. Alistair Bungle, Sky News, in Jerusalem.
There were big falls on Wall Street today, largely affecting some of the biggest tech companies, with the blame falling on a low-cost Chinese AI startup called DeepSeek, which threatens the dominance of US firms. Well, our business and economics correspondent Paul Kelso is with me now in the studio. Paul, this is a big deal, isn't it? Explain what has happened and what the significance is. Over $1 trillion wiped off US tech.
It's remarkable. It's a really
shares.
Interesting story. DeepSeek is an AI assistant. People becoming familiar with these. ChatGPT, probably the most well-known. This is a Chinese-developed AI assistant that's had a new release in the last few days and has been seen to perhaps be at least caught up with ChatGPT and other American ones, and it's perhaps challenging American dominance. Let's look, as a result, what that did to Wall Street and some significant stocks today. NVIDIA, which makes the chips upon which most AI development depends, down 16%. $600 billion wiped off its market capitalisation. That's more than JP Morgan is worth, in total the biggest bank in the world. If we look at the NASDAQ, which is reflects the tech industry, it's an index, that's down 3%, $1 trillion off the value of tech stocks. Why? Because this has shaken investor faith in what they thought would be the path of AI, which is the most fundamental new technology there is. The feeling is that this will be driven by scale and by big investment in massive projects using the most advanced chips, requiring huge amounts of money and largely driven by America. We know Meta, we know Google, we know Elon Musk, ChatGPT, which is owned by OpenAI, all chasing this. Last week, Donald Trump heralded a $500 billion investment by American money in AI, all using the latest chips. Well, this product has come along from China using less advanced chips made by NVIDIA, but less advanced because the export of the most advanced one is actually banned to China, in part to try and hold back that competition. Well, this company is saying that it's been able to make these developments with these reduced capability chips. The founder of the company, Lang Wangfeng, says it's only cost $5.6 million to develop. Now, there's a lot that isn't known about the real cost, but in a day, it appears to have changed the judgment of how far ahead certainly American tech is. And this is fascinating. We saw all those tech billionaires lined up behind Donald Trump last week, his big promise of American growth, based in large part as they all chase AI and the ultimate goal of general intelligence, which everyone thinks is the end game. China is absolutely not out of this race. On this evidence, it's catching up fast, and it is fascinating to see where this will go and whether investors will calm down or whether this looks to be a loss of faith in the American market.
Seemingly a revolution no one saw coming. Paul, thank you very much. The UN Security Council will meet tomorrow over the escalating violence on the border between the Democratic Republic of the Congo and Rwanda. Rwanda-backed rebels said they had taken control of the key city of Goma, while the Rwandan military said that 5 of its troops were killed in Rwanda as the violence threatens to spread. The UN has maintained a peacekeeping force in the DRC for more than 2 decades. Its main effort in recent years has been against a rebel group known as M23, which the UN and the DRC say is backed by Rwanda. M23 is one of about 100 armed groups that have been vying for control of a mineral-rich region to the east of the country. Over the last few years, they've established more and more control with hundreds of thousands of people displaced as a consequence. However, they rapidly advanced in January this year, capturing the key eastern Congolese towns of Minova and Masisi. Now the M23 rebels have captured the key city of Goma from Congolese forces as fighting escalated, despite calls from the UN Security Council for the insurgents to withdraw. The surge of violence has killed at least 13 peacekeepers over the past week. Hundreds of people, including UN staff, have been seen fleeing the fierce fighting. From Goma, our Africa correspondent, Yusra El-Bagir, reports.
A solemn walk of surrender. Congolese soldiers laying down arms in a city now captured by the rebels they were trained to fight. We're trying to see as much as we can while seeking shelter. There's ongoing fighting in the streets as M23 cleans it block by block, trying to cement their control. And in the distance on the road, you can see uniforms laid out on the road in surrender, not just by Congolese forces, but also the hundreds of foreign mercenaries fighting alongside them. But the fighting hasn't stopped. Some soldiers are holding on in pockets of resistance around town. Many aren't banking on their success, fleeing across Lake Kivu and on foot to safety. Soldiers have fled too, now in the hands of their neighbor Rwanda, who are backing the rebels that chased them out. There's heavy shelling on DRC's border, with mortars and artillery coming in from the Rwandan side.
We are taking measures, of course.
We spoke to Rwanda's military spokesperson, who says they're firing in retaliation to deadly attacks from this side. Is this an all-out war?
No, it isn't. It isn't. We are just taking all necessary defensive measures to protect the population living along the border. And we will continue to play our role, our primary role, of protecting the territorial integrity of Rwanda.
The tension here is lethal. Prisoners have escaped from the central prison, and looting has been reported across the city.
There is shooting all over the city. We don't know who is shooting, whether it's the M23 or our soldiers. The city is going through a very complicated situation.
Diplomatic ties have been cut, and the UN and senior diplomats are calling on Rwandan troops to leave the DRC.
France strongly condemns the offensive led by the M23, supported by the Rwandan armed forces, which has resulted in the death of 6 peacekeepers and the displacement of tens of thousands of civilians. The fighting must stop and dialogue must resume.
Fatigues on the ground in Goma mark a fallen city with an uncertain future. Yusra El-Bagir, Sky News, Goma.
North Korean troops appear to have temporarily pulled back from the front line in Russia after suffering heavy losses in their first clashes with Ukrainian soldiers. In an exclusive interview with Sky News, a Ukrainian Special Forces commander said he believes Kim Jong-un's men will regroup before returning to the battlefield. Our security and defence editor Deborah Haynes reports from a secret base in northeastern Ukraine. And a warning, this report contains distressing images.
Control.
Ukrainian special forces move in on a unit of North Koreans that's just been hit by drones and artillery. They take no chances. The soldiers say Kim Jong-un's men have been known to blow themselves up with grenades on the battlefield rather than be captured alive.
Honestly, I didn't feel any pity for them. These people came from the other side of the world to fight against us on behalf of the enemy.
Sky News spoke exclusively to a commando who was on the operation inside the Russian region of Kursk. He says their task was to gather evidence to prove North Korean forces are fighting in the war, something neither Pyongyang nor Moscow have officially confirmed.
We are cutting hair for DNA testing. We take a sample from under the lip with a cotton swab. And of course we take tags that might indicate their presence, documents, military ID cards.
The ID cards are Russian, seemingly a clumsy attempt to mask identities. Evidence too, though, of real lives and loved ones back home. The commander of the Special Forces unit said the first time his men spotted North Koreans was on the 15th of December.
Unlike the Russians, who previously operated in smaller groups, we were now seeing groups of 20, 40 or even 60 men moving with remarkable speed. We began coordinating artillery strikes. What was unusual in this case was that they didn't retreat.
He shows us what he says is footage of dozens of North Korean soldiers killed fighting to help Moscow retake a chunk of Kursk that was captured by Ukraine last year. Kyiv says some 4,000 out of 11,000 North Koreans deployed to Russia have so far been killed or injured. We join a mortar team on Ukraine's side of the border with Kursk. They say attacks in this direction are intensifying, even as Moscow and Pyongyang focus on pushing Ukrainian troops off Russian land. Fire, he shouts. The soldiers are aiming for targets inside Russia.
They just fired their mortars towards the Russian positions. We've been told there's a drone overhead, so we're having to get back to cover.
With Ukraine now pitched against two of the world's largest armies, it's a grueling fight.
The biggest danger? Mortars, shelling or FPV drones, and sometimes sabotage and reconnaissance groups.
The battle for Kursk could be about to become even harder, especially if the North Koreans learn lessons from their first clashes.
Right now, for about 2 weeks, there have been no North Koreans at all. Either they are analyzing their mistakes or tending to their wounds, or maybe they are waiting for reinforcements. There is talk that Kim Jong-un is sending more North Koreans here.
And what do you think?
I think they will return soon.
Deborah Haynes, Sky News, northeastern Ukraine.
A Sky News survey of care providers suggests councils are already making big cutbacks to social care, and in some cases, care is being cancelled completely. Sky's Nick Martin has spoken to one couple who have had the care they need taken away.
You okay?
Graham and Angela Carson are among more than 1 million older people in Britain who need vital help in their own home. Graham suffers from muscular dystrophy. Angela has Guillain-Barré syndrome, which means her immune system attacks her nerves and joints. Carers are needed several times a day to help move Graham and prepare meals for them both.
Hello, it's Graham. Just want to know if the council have been on for Angela's care package.
It's a week before Christmas, and Angela has been told by her local council that she can no longer have a home carer to help her. And Graham's care package is being reduced. They're shocked.
They just said it was stopped, and I was quite independent, and this would promote my independence more. I don't see how it can. I don't know how I'm going to manage. I don't want to get upset.
Graham and Angela's care is paid for by West Lothian Council. Last November, the council publicly admitted its finances were in a mess, with an £8.1 million overspend, fuelled in part by rising social care costs. It said it needs to make savings. The Scottish Government controls social care, but we've discovered that cuts to care packages aren't just happening in Scotland, they appear to be happening across Britain too. An exclusive Sky News survey of domestic care providers across Scotland, England and Wales indicates a worrying trend of cuts to these services in the last 2 years. 83% of care providers who responded told us that their council had cut the number of care packages being paid for. Angela is now preparing meals for Graham and herself. She's doing the laundry, she's going out to do the shopping, and she's making hot drinks. Just put your hand on your heart for me. How has it been
terrible. I go to bed at night and that's all I can think about. I feel like I don't exist anymore. I feel if I wasn't here, it wouldn't matter.
We asked West Lothian Council for an interview, but they declined, telling us a consistent and fair approach is applied when reviewing or assessing an individual's care, with any changes to a care plan being made on the basis of assessed need and not to address financial pressures. According to Age UK, more than 2.5 million older people are left struggling because they aren't getting the care that they need. It is a cruel side effect of a broken social care system which is leaving millions suffering behind closed doors. Nick Martin, Sky News.
Well, that was Sky News at 10. Coming up, we'll take a first look at tomorrow's newspapers in the press preview. Tonight, we're joined by the political editor at The Sun, Harry Cole, and the political editor at The Guardian, Pippa Carrera. Amongst the stories, we'll be discussing tomorrow's papers marking 80 years since the liberation of Auschwitz. Do stay with us.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story.
I'm ready. Are you?
Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
You are watching the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. It's time to see what's making the headlines with the political editor of The Sun, Harry Cole, and the political editor at The Guardian, Pippa Crerar. They'll be with us from now until just before midnight. So time now to see what's making some of those front pages. Well, the Metro's front page is dedicated to the Auschwitz commemoration, with a moving picture of one of the survivors of the camp being comforted. The Mail says the survivors gathered for the last time before the gateway of death. The Express also features a picture of a former prisoner of Auschwitz, quoting King Charles, saying evil was allowed to flourish. It's the same photograph used on the front of the Mirror, which says it is our duty to remember. The Telegraph features a picture of the Princess of Wales at a Holocaust memorial event. But its main story says non-crime hate laws are to be expanded. In The Times, it reports that an internal Home Office review recommends sweeping changes to how extremism is countered. And on the front of the Eye, UK banks squeeze savers again to boost their profits. The FT says the low-cost Chinese AI firm DeepSeek triggered a tumble in tech stocks by showing it could use far less computing power than Nvidia or other rivals. The Guardian says US tech stocks are in turmoil after the release of the Chinese AI chatbot. And the Daily Star also colourfully notes the turmoil on the markets, saying DeepSeek wiped millions of US tech stocks. We're joined tonight by Harry Cole and Pippa Crerar. Welcome to you both. Very sombre front pages, many of the front pages, with that 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz. I don't know how much of the coverage you saw today, but deeply, deeply moving, and with the quotes from the King saying, you know, this evil should never, ever be allowed to happen again. Pippa.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I watched a lot of the coverage, and many of the front pages have pictures of some of the 56 survivors, all of whom would be in their 90s, who survived their time at Auschwitz, Birkenau, before it was liberated by the Red Army 80 years ago. They will have just been teenagers at the time, most of them, or younger, so a very long time ago. But some of the testimony which they told today shows just how starkly vivid those memories, those awful memories of those horrors of being in that death camp have stuck with them. And I was very struck by the dignity and the humanity and the courage of some of those individuals being able to rake back over what must have been the most the worst of worst experiences, you know, when they were stripped of their humanity in the face of the Nazis' evil. And Auschwitz-Birkenau, 1.1 million people were murdered there, and yet when the Red Army arrived, there was only 7,000 prisoners who remained. Others had obviously been marched off on death marches as the Nazis retreated west. One of the most striking books I've ever read is, well, there's two, in fact, by Primo Levi, who was the Italian Jewish author who spent a year in Auschwitz-Birkenau and then survived and lived for 40 more years, but then took his own life. One of his friends said that he died in Auschwitz, but 40 years later. And he wrote, I was reading today again, reminding myself, he wrote about how the men who arrived in Auschwitz-Birkenau cast strangely embarrassed glances at the sprawling bodies at the battered huts and the few of us still alive. He was in hospital himself with scarlet fever, the ill being those primarily that were left behind. They did not greet us, nor did they smile. They seemed oppressed not only by compassion, but by the feeling of guilt that such a crime could exist. And I think survivors of the Second World War, generations which have followed, people that were born like us years after the Second World War, nevertheless, I think still feel, I know I do, that sort of collective guilt that such an atrocity could take place, and really sort of brings into question humanity and how we as a people could do this. I, must have been about 10 years ago, visited Auschwitz-Birkenau, and it was one of the most profound and moving experiences of my life. And the images and the stories, crucially, that we've heard today have brought a lot of that back.
And for that very reason, many of them saying today that you must never forget, mustn't forget what happened, lest it happen again.
Obviously, 80 years is a significant landmark that's being noted, but also these 56 survivors, they're in their late 90s, some of them. This will probably be the last time that they are able to gather like this at a sort of landmark moment. And I think that's why there's been such a poignancy today in the fact that from their message of saying never forget, because it really is the last time we're going to hear from them in a scenario like this. So obviously the pictures, I mean, pretty clean sweep on the front pages. This Stanislav Zalewski, I've probably got that name wrong, but what an image there. And obviously, I mean, how serious to take it. It's the first time the head of state, king, one of our monarchs has been there as monarch. Again, marking that particularly poignant milestone. And then, when you see pictures like this, you realise it's, we read about this in history books, we talk about it, but like this is still living history. This is still within a generation. And I think there's some quite stark and alarming polling around, kicking around the last couple of days, of just how few people actually, when actually pushed about their knowledge of the Holocaust, actually know these stories in any detail. Of course, it is taught, but it needs to be taught more and more as these people aren't around.
And that's something
to tell these stories.
Sir Keir Starmer
touched on actually quite well. I thought he did very well today.
Spoken about in schools, it needs to be taught history, so it isn't something that then passes off into the annals of history that we forget about.
Yeah, he visited Auschwitz-Birkenau with his wife, Victoria, a couple of weeks ago, and today he was talking about how they had been in one of the buildings, I can't remember what number it was, but it was given a number, at Auschwitz, and they'd been looking through the Book of Remembrance, trying to find the names, because the Nazis were, prolific record keepers, and trying to find the names of her relatives, because she came from a Jewish family, or comes from a Jewish family, who had been at Auschwitz. So, that very sort of personal connection for the Prime Minister and his wife as well. And he has praised, as many politicians have praised, and supported financially the government for a long time, a charity called the Holocaust Educational Trust, which is the charity that I went with when I went to Auschwitz-Birkenau. And they do an amazing job. They take school children, sort of older teens generally, they take plane loads out to Poland to visit, and they spend a day there. And they visit the Auschwitz Museum, and obviously there's the testimonies are written and recounted there, but also there's the very moving images of or displays of things like shoes and hair and possessions that people arrived at Auschwitz with and were taken from them, and they're still there, all piled up. And then they take the children over to Birkenau, which was the death camp, where when I was there, it was like thigh-deep snow, very bleak day, very evocative of what it might have been like. And the remains of these wooden huts that people were stored in. I mean, I use the word deliberately because it was while they were awaiting extermination in the gas chambers, the rickety remains were still there. And actually just experiencing that and being there will teach those children more and future generations more than any history book could. So it's an incredible charity.
Harry, just to have a quick look at the Daily Telegraph, the Princess of Wales at a Holocaust Memorial Day service in London. Photograph there with a candle. Yeah, I mean, obviously the scenes from Auschwitz itself are, dominating, but this event is being marked across the world, not least in London tonight. With the royals, I mean, everyone out on force really. It's to mark that moment, and actually, I think there has been a remarkable amount of a positive, if I can use that word in a sense, coverage of the good things coming out. It has been an incredibly rough few years to be Jewish in lots of countries around the world, not least Britain. Rising anti-Semitism across Europe, the rise of the far right, the return of the far right across Europe, and frankly also, closer to home, we shouldn't shy away from the fact that anti-Semitism has been on the march in this country. I think the Irish president, behaved fairly disgracefully. He was asked by the Jewish community not to speak out
not to even attend this event, given his views on Israel and his views on anti-Semitism, and yet some people still, can't even take a day off, and I think that's sad. But on the whole, remarkably positive contribution from leaders and roles and the like.
OK. Harry and Pippa, thank you very much for the moment. We'll be discussing this story on the front of The Guardian next. Their headline, US tech stocks in turmoil after Chinese firm unveils AI chatbot. Do stay with us to find out more on that story.
I'm James Matthews, and I'm Sky's US correspondent, based here in Washington, D.C. Do you fear a fourth indictment? Does your government owe an apology to the British home children? Does your government owe them an apology? The fact that they were intercepted, does that indicate a military weakness on the part of Iran? No. Free, wherever you get your news. There's no doubting the strength of this hurricane as it roars through. You can feel a devastating power. It had been a difficult night in a deadly storm.
Bang, bang. You can hear it hitting the windows.
Our houses are okay.
It's depressing.
As bad as all of this is, it could have been much worse. Today, this land they call sacred is at the heart of America's electric car revolution.
To me, it's a sacred ground.
The white gold rush is a race that Biden doesn't want to lose. I've covered some of the biggest stories in the world. Donald Trump, 45th President of the United States, it would appear is about to learn his fate.
Escort coming out!
San Quentin houses America's largest death row. They rarely allow cameras onto the condemned block.
James Matthews, Sky News. I want them to be treated equally like everyone else. It's one step closer to getting out, to getting off death row.
Sky News. Get the full story first. Mr. Trump, James Matthews from Sky News.
Hey, James.
You're diminished by claims that you're a racist.
Question?
Mr. Musk, has your ignorance and ego cost Ukrainian lives? Vladimir Putin calls you outstanding. What do you call him, sir?
He's from Sky News. He's from Sky News. He's entitled to ask me questions.
That gives you the very best of Sky News wherever you are. Breaking news, videos and analysis.
Evidence of the crisis.
Podcasts, watching us live.
I'm live in Jerusalem.
Wherever you get your podcast.
All in one place and all at just the touch of a screen. The Sky News app. Get the full story first.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story.
I'm ready. Are you?
Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
Mandatory evacuation, you must leave!
For many people, Harvey is far from over.
People here believe the water will be this deep for weeks.
I'm Greg Milam, and I'm Sky's Chief North of England correspondent.
Are you trying to run me over, Sir Philip?
No, go away.
Look like it, sir. Will you respond to those who made accusations, Sir Philip?
Can you go away?
Sky News, the full story first.
Welcome back. You are watching the press preview. Still with me, Harry and Pippa. We're going to take you through the next section of newspapers, starting off with the front page of The Guardian. And this story, US tech stocks in turmoil after Chinese firm unveils AI chatbot. This is DeepSeek, which has wiped $1 trillion off the tech stocks. So this is a new kid on the block, which has taken everyone by surprise, seemingly. This is a big deal.
It is. I mean, I'd like to say that I'm an expert in AI and also in sort of in chatbots, but I'm not. However, fortunately, we've got the newspapers to rely on.
Very good explainer in The Guardian, I have to say. Yeah.
Well, there you go.
I don't often say it, but
yeah,
I did read it on the way in.
Always the best explainers, obviously. But it is. But I think what's happened here is that there's a big Chinese firm, DeepSeek, which is a competitor to OpenAI and its tool that we all know and love, ChatGPT, or don't love perhaps, but they have managed to produce a alternative chatbot for, they claim, a fraction of the cost. I mean, they claim it took them 2 months and less than 5 million quid. I think some analysts have raised some eyebrows about that. And it was built using chips, albeit older ones, from NVIDIA, which is the big US firm, and also using some of Meta's architecture as well. But what has happened as a result is that it's wiped I think it was 600 billion off the market value of NVIDIA, which is the leading US maker of computer chips, which is a record loss for any company. And more than one analyst has suggested that it's reminiscent of the day that the dot-com bubble burst with the sell-off. It might not be as extreme as that, but it is certainly the case that it's sort of become, if not an existential moment, then certainly a moment of great self-reflection for all these big US firms that pump billions and billions of investment in.
What a contrast with what a difference a week makes, eh? Because you remember last week there was the broliarchy, as they've been called, the big tech bosses all standing there in the rotunda behind Donald Trump as he's being inaugurated, looking like kings of the world. You had all of these, all the CEOs of these companies we're talking about. And now they're facing, a proper rough day at the office. Now, this sort of started over the weekend that this sort of Chinese firm basically showed it's working, essentially, showed what it can do. There is some scepticism about how safe it is, given that, a Chinese-owned company can basically, at any time will have to surrender its data and its sort of back end to the Chinese government. So there is sort of scepticism about how much of a market share they're going to actually be able to get in the US, given the massive security concerns around them. But they have put the willies up the Silicon Valley very, very quickly today.
It will be interesting to see Donald Trump's response to this, won't it? Let's have a look at the Telegraph, a story regarding hate crimes, non-crime hate laws set to be expanded. And previously we'd been told that they were set to be scrapped under Suella Braverman in 2023. This is a complete
There's a leaked report. It's one of those stories where I was reading it this morning and you could have picked any line from it. There's just one of those reports. There's so much news in it, and I think lots of different papers have gone with lots of different lines. When Yvette Cooper came in, the new Home Secretary, she basically said, like, show me what's going on, lift up the bonnet. And a leaked copy of this review has come back, and it seems to be pretty sweeping in its recommendations, be it, as the Telegraph has gone with non-crime hate laws to be expanded. These are highly controversial things in the fact that you can essentially have, you can be recorded for a crime you didn't commit. That's not, sorry, you basically get a record for a crime that it isn't a crime, and it's for highly contentious. There's also lots of sort of sweeping expansion of definitions of extremism, from using something like two-tier Kia is apparently a far-right trope now. There's lots of attacks on the manosphere of the internet, and now this is going to go down, quite badly. Depending, you can sort of pick and choose how you take this. The Home Office are slightly distancing themselves from their own report tonight and saying, look, this is a draft, it's leaked. But these are just recommendations. We might not take them all on, but it's going to really has put the cat amongst the pigeons.
OK, Pippa, got about 20 seconds, I'm afraid.
Yeah, no, just that the Dan Jarvis, the Security Minister, and Yvette Cooper have both rejected the reports on the wider range of extremism and expanding the non-crime hate incidents beyond Islamophobia and anti-Semitism. So those are the ones they want to stick with.
Except that terrorism rules do need rewriting, as the last week has shown.
Harry and Pippa, thank you so much. See you at the top of the hour. Coming up next on Sky News at 11, survivors take part in a ceremony to mark 80 years since the Auschwitz concentration camp was liberated.
Mandatory evacuation, you must leave!
For many people, Harvey is far from over.
People here believe the water will be this deep for weeks. I'm Greg Milam, and I'm Sky's chief North of England correspondent. Are you trying to run me over, Sir Philip?
No, go away.
Look like it, sir. Will you respond to those who made accusations, Sir Philip?
Can you go away?
Sky News, the full story first.
I saw police being forceful, pushing young men and women to the ground as they made almost 100 arrests. Will the cold affect your voters?
Well, we have a lot of tremendous support.
Free, wherever you get your news. The people here know that worse storms may well be on their way. I'm Martha Kellner and I'm Sky's US correspondent based here in Los Angeles.